Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar. We will be talking about our TropicsWatch solution and the tools we offer to aid hurricane-related decision-making. I am Lindsay Falconer with Storm Geo, and I will be moderating today's webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared via email either tomorrow or today. If you have any questions, you can type them in the questions box on the side of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Our two speakers today are Mike Finsky and Don Shelley. Mike is the Manager of Account Services for the CST team and Quality Leader for our Client Resiliency Services. He is also a seasoned meteorologist. He will be showcasing the best practices for our hurricane tools within Storm Geo's portal. Don is the Head of Oil and Gas for North America, and he will provide insight on how best to apply the hurricane tools to your decision-making processes. Thank you for participating in our webinar and sharing your expertise with us, gentlemen. Let's go ahead and get started. Mike, I will go ahead and turn the microphone over to you.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We wanted to take the time today to go through some of our TropicsWatch tools, very timely subject now that we are in the middle of June, and in fact have already reached our D storm, Dolly, which developed yesterday in the Northeast Atlantic, just off the coast of New England and Nova Scotia. So it's definitely turning out to be an active season name-wise so far. So we want to go through and talk about our TropicsWatch tools in some detail, some of the lesser known tools that people often find, and many clients of ours often find very useful. And I'm gonna walk through the web portal a little bit and show you our new web portal to give you some examples of where you can find this information. So to begin with, I'm going to talk about our TropicsWatch service and what we call our forecast funnel. So with our TropicsWatch services and with our other services, we always start by looking at things from a bird's eye level down to site-specific information. And for TropicsWatch, that starts with our TropicsWatch Daily Briefing, often called our Atlantic Daily Briefing. And we also prepare these for other basins around the world. So even when it's not the tropical season in the Atlantic, we often have activity in the West Pacific, South Pacific, Northwest Australia, and so on. So the daily briefing is a daily product that is available on the web portal and is also emailed to our customers that provides an overview of any tropical development, a satellite analysis, and like I said, is available globally. What you'll see on one of these products is, such as you see on the screen here, there's a map that shows kind of the state of the basin and identifies any disturbances that we're monitoring, plus any named storms that are out there. So in addition, you can see here we have some disturbances that we use our own numbering scheme for, but once they become a named storm, we will use the naming convention that you're used to with the tropical depressions, storms, and hurricanes. Along with each disturbance and storm on the daily briefing, there'll also be a text block for each disturbance. So not only can you see graphically where we're looking at for disturbances, you can also see what we expect to happen, whether we expect it to develop or not, or whether we expect it to move out to sea and not really impact any land areas. So that's our highest level portion of our TropicsWatch service. It's a very popular product that we do, and it does provide that outlook, and we send it daily, like I said, for the hurricane season, June through November. Oftentimes we'll start it early in May when the first activity develops. And over the last couple of years, we've had to start this in May for some early season activity. When we take a step down from the daily briefing, now we're starting to look at when there's an actual storm that has developed and we're tracking it. So we'll provide real-time track updates at least every 6 hours, providing a graphic and commentary, full suite of our timeline tools, which I will go through in more detail a little bit later, and these too are available globally. This should look very familiar to most people because it's similar to what you'd see from the National Hurricane Center or some media resources that are out there. It's a track forecast with a cone of uncertainty issued every 6 hours. And we have 12-hour time steps on here. So as you can see from the track, also we go out 7 days instead of the typical 5 days. In addition, one of the things that we do that is really to benefit our customers in the Eastern time zone is we send these out an hour or two earlier than what the Hurricane Center might send out, because we feel it's important for our customers to have the latest information on their desk in mid-afternoon rather than at the end of the business day. That way, you can make your plans for your executive briefings. You can contact Storm Geo about taking part in conference calls. So there's a lot of benefit to having this a little bit earlier. These are our own forecasts. We use our own system called ImpTrack that's in-house with our tropical meteorologists. But oftentimes the track and the path will look similar just because we're all looking at the same model data. But we can be a little bit more bold in our predictions because the Hurricane Center is focused primarily on life safety, personal safety of residents in the US. We, of course, are concerned with that as well, but we're also focusing on our client needs and their sensitivities to tropical weather. So along with the track forecast, we'll have the information that you're accustomed to seeing, the location of the storm, the movement, the max winds, and whether it's organizing or not, and some additional text. Key points. This is always really important because this is where we will place information about changes from the previous forecast. So you'll see these on here. So if you don't have the time to read everything in here, read these key points, and that would be get you the most important information. In addition to our forecast on here, we'll have expected impacts onshore and offshore for different areas. So this is from Dorian as well. You can see we were expecting catastrophic damage for the Northern Bahamas, which if you can remember from last year, that's exactly what happened with Dorian. Excuse me. In addition, on our advisories, once a storm gets close enough to landfall where we can start pinpointing not just the winds, but also the rainfall, we'll provide rainfall graphics. And so this has become really important over the last few years. It's always been the case that the primary threats from a hurricane are winds, obviously, but also water. And we know storm surge is an issue, but with Harvey and Imelda and Florence along the East Coast, we've known that the water falling from the sky is also of great importance. So we spend a lot of time looking at the rainfall forecasts as well. One thing I wanted to point out, and I'll also let Don Shelley chime in on this a bit as well, is that we have a cone of uncertainty, which is what really everyone is used to seeing on all hurricane forecasts. But we also have another tool that we feel is more helpful. We'll use the cone of uncertainty because it is helpful. However, keep in mind that the cone of uncertainty is really just a look back at track error over the previous 5 years. So we can look at each time step, what the typical error is on the track for the last 5 years, and we combine that into an area called the cone of uncertainty. Just because you're in the cone of uncertainty doesn't mean you're going to have great impacts from the storm, and just because you're out of the cone of uncertainty doesn't mean you're not going to have impacts. If the center of the storm, like I pointed out here, over Vermilion Bay in Louisiana, moved over to the east and moved in near Pensacola, that would eliminate a lot of the impacts along the Texas coast. Vice versa, if it moved in along the middle Texas coast, it would eliminate a lot of the impacts of Mobile and Pensacola, even though all are within the cone of uncertainty. So really just keep that in mind. Another tool that we've used to help actually determine the track of the storm is using what we call ensemble model data. Most people are familiar with the different model data, especially the American GFS, the European model data. There's a lot of global model data, and every time a model is run, it is run multiple times with different initial conditions, and that's called an ensemble run. So what we've done at Storm Geo is we use these ensemble runs, and sometimes it's 90 to 100 different members. And here in these examples, you can see this is 94 ensemble members, this is 93. And we create a heat map that shows the best possible path of the storm based on these ensembles. So here on the left, you can see from Irma, we had pretty good confidence that the storm, while it was located out here east of the Caribbean, that it was going to make a turn north of Cuba and impact Florida. You can see a pretty good agreement within this track. However, this can also let you know when there's two options and two ways the track could go. And this is from Hagapit in the Western Pacific in the Philippines back from 2014. And this is a good example of where there's really good track confidence in the first couple of days, but then it splits. It can either go westward across the Philippines, or it could curve out to sea and not impact the Philippines. So if you're in Manila, this is very helpful as well. But if you're out here in the northwest corner of the Philippines, you can see that really there isn't too much of a threat, even though the storm is lurking out there. I'm going to pass it along to Don for a minute. I believe he wants to add some information to these. Don?
It seems Don is muted. I don't know if Don can unmute himself.
I'll just continue going if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Aha!
All right.
I can. Aha! There's the magic button.
There you go.
Yeah, Mike's been wanting the power to mute me for years and years and years, so I think he's taking advantage of the situation. You guys can hear me now. Is that correct, Mike? Lindsay?
Yes. Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah. Mike did an excellent job of covering the cone of uncertainty and track. Mike, if you could just go back one slide. The thing I wanted to point out from what I do here at Storm Geo and what my team does at Storm Geo is we spend a lot of time working with our clients in terms of understanding their risk profiles. And so we know that what our clients are using our services for is for decision guidance. And I think part of the reason we wanted to include that here today, and for many of you, you've seen us talk time and time again on our webinars and in trainings and other things about the cone of uncertainty versus the track. But the reason for doing that is we think it's a very important thing. The reason we keep talking about it is we think it's very important. And I think probably there is more confusion around the concept of the cone of uncertainty than almost anything I know that's in common use in the tropical realm. And so, for example, a lot of people don't realize that what they're looking at right there, for example, the way the cone is drawn on the right-hand side of the screen, that actually is a form of time travel that's going on. That yellow area that you see represented there by the cone, which is the combination of each of those error tracks, is looking back at what the historical error has been over the last 5 years. And so when it's called a cone of uncertainty, it is true to say that it represents the uncertainty of the path of the storm and what you should be thinking about as an organization that's making your decisions around your hurricane mitigation, your hurricane response, but understand that that uncertainty is past historical error. So if you go forward again, looking at the tracked graphic, as Mike was pointing out, there are TRAC, the threatened regions from active cyclones, which will be on the next slide. You can see that that's a very different representation of the certainty or uncertainty. And what's important about the representation that's contained within the track, the one without the K, the TRAC, is that this actually reflects what's going on in the atmosphere now and with this particular event. And I really love this slide, the way it's constructed here, because as Mike pointed out, with Irma on the left, you can see that there was a high degree of confidence in that track, the type of thing that if you're making decisions, and remember, Irma was a powerful Category 4, Category 5 storm when we're looking at here now. Some important decisions were having to be made, for example, by lease operators in the Gulf of Mexico, where you see the areas that are there just to the left of the dark blue, where there's a low probability of passage, decisions about evacuation, relocation of drilling rigs, that type of thing. These are high dollar value, high human life risk situations that are being made. And when you can have the confidence that you see there on the left in Irma's track, that's very important. If Irma had been showing the same type of tracking model that we see there on the right with Hagaput, imagine what that would have been like if you superimpose that over the Gulf of Mexico coming the same way. Mike, would you agree that that would have changed a lot of the conference calls that we would have been having with folks and the types of decisions that they were trying to make?
Oh, absolutely. We've had a storm in the southern Gulf of Mexico. The name escapes me right now, but it had some of that split guidance on the right where it was either going to Texas or it was going to Florida. And so that obviously makes a big difference, not just onshore, but offshore, as to how you plan on this, where there was little to no chance of it actually hitting the northern Gulf of Mexico. It was going one way or the other. And this illustrated that.
Correct. And so what I like to point out to our clients, particularly when we're in the consultation mode, which is what I do and with my team, is understanding that the level of confidence you can have when confidence is high becomes very important in the decisions that you make, or sometimes the decisions that you make not to undertake certain actions, which can also be very important in a business response. But also you want to know when there is a level of uncertainty. And so if you're using the cone of uncertainty to decide how much uncertainty there is, you're really, in my opinion, using the wrong tool. Like one of the things we've been discussing internally for a number of years here at StormGeo is whether we would even continue to produce cones of uncertainty. For all the reasons that you see here, the error cone really doesn't represent the current track. It's always the same size. So it doesn't matter the size of the storm, every advisory, every storm, it's based on historical error. It actually keeps shrinking. The cones keep getting smaller because the historical margins of error keep improving. And yet now the cone has gotten so small that the effects are very often felt outside the cone. In fact, that happened here just with Cristobal in this season here, where most of the impacts for the storm were far to the northeast, well outside the cone of uncertainty regarding its center. And we believe the error cone really can't be used for decision making as effectively. And so a tool like our ensemble-based track, we think, is a better way of using and utilizing our tools to make those types of decisions. And I think it's just one of the best examples that we have of some of the unique things that we offer that are in our TropicsWatch toolkit that need to be considered by businesses when they're using what we're doing there. And even with, as it, you know, there on the last bullet point, even with the ensemble-based track, there still is a role that the meteorologist plays today in terms of looking at and interpreting and making track adjustments. I can assure you that Chris Hebert and the rest of the TropicsWatch team do consume the track, the TRAC, in terms of when they're looking at what our tracks are going to look like that we include in our codes of uncertainty. But there still is a human factor that we bring to the table as well. I don't know, Mike, if you had anything else to say about track. I just want to talk about what I think it's actually one of our most important tools, and it's the type of tool that our clients, the better they understand that tool, I think the better equipped they are for making decisions.
Yeah, I agree, Don. And I think not just understanding track, but I just hear a lot of people in social media and on the news when they talk about the cone of uncertainty, being in it or being out of it. Oh, we're in the cone now, so we're going to get hit, or we're out of the cone, so we're safe. It's just something you got to keep in mind that that's just based on the historical error.
Yeah,
so that's why we like to point that out.
I'll just mention anecdotally, I was actually at this was in 2018, so this was after Hurricane Harvey impacted the Houston area, which is where Mike and I reside and where our operations center is here in this part of the U.S. And I was at a meeting where one of, I won't say who it was, I will protect the innocent, but actually someone who was involved in the public decision-making process was actually showing a PowerPoint deck, and they showed the cone of uncertainty, and that person referred to it as, well, here's the area of impact. And I just sort of cringed actually in my seat with the realization of, no, that's not really what that is. And so that's part of the reason that we do these types of webinars and we do additional training for our clients or for our prospects while we would talk about this, is really getting to understand when you're seeing that graphical representation, and the cone again is just one of these examples, understand what it is, but most importantly, understand what it's not.
Okay. That sounds good. Thank you, Don. I'm gonna go ahead and move on to some more of our tropical products. We continue down that forecast funnel and we get down to site forecasts. And site forecasts are exactly what you think they are. They take that data from our hurricane track forecast and we extrapolate the individual impacts to a site. So you'll get, when you have a site forecast, there's a lot of tools that go along with the site forecast, but one of the most popular things that we talk about within site forecasts is that wind profile. That wind profiles is based exactly on a specific location. It'll show you the minimum and maximum sustained winds and the max gusts that are possible. You'll also have a discussion for the location, rainfall for that location, and the ever important storm surge if you're in an area that receives storm surge. I know this graphic is a little hard to see, but this just shows that we have hour by hour wind speed projections for locations based on our track, our forecast advisory that came out. So these come out as well every 6 hours with an advisory if one of our client locations is located in the track of the storm. Another tool that we have, and I'll show it to you because it's a very dynamic tool on their web portal, is even if we're not monitoring one of the locations for you, there is what we call a wind profile generator, where you can actually go in and type a city and state or type in a decimal degrees and get a wind profile for even a location that we're not technically monitoring for you. I used the story of, I used this during Hurricane Ike in 2008. I just moved into a new house, and we were determining whether we need to board up or not. And so I put in the latitude longitude of my new house and was able to track the wind speeds and what we expected for the location. Ultimately, I boarded up. It made the right decision. But this is useful if you're traveling or you have employees that are out traveling in an area that's not typically covered under a contract with StormGeo. And again, I'll show you some more of that on the web portal itself. Excuse me. Now the timeline tools. Most people recall the 2005 season, the season of Katrina and Rita and Wilma, the season we went into the Greek alphabet, the season we had a storm every single month of the year. After that season, some of the meteorologists here at StormGeo, in particular Chris Hebert, who's the head of our TropicsWatch team, and Bob Weinzapfel, came up with what we call our timeline tools. And these are tools that help our clients make decisions based on actual objective guidance that we're providing. So there's 4 of these, and excuse the acronyms, we have a lot of acronyms, but the 4 are Response Plan Activator, or RPA, Worst Case Scenario, WCS, Probability of Wind Impact, PWI, and then our Hurricane Severity Index, which is HSI. So I'm going to start with the Response Plan Activator. The Response Plan Activator, in an overview, is a very simple concept. It's always going to either be positive or negative. Right now, everybody is, in the US at least, is RPA negative. If our forecasters determine that an area of the coastline is going to be impacted by a tropical threat in the next 3 to 7 days, they will highlight that area of the coastline, and every one of our client locations that receives our tropical service within there will be turned RPA positive. And it's like magic. When we draw that area and we hit that send button and folks get notifications that they're RPA positive, our phones start ringing, because that's really what we want to happen. We want you to use that to start activating your response plans. And a lot of people's first actions on a response plan is oftentimes to not only get the response plan out, dust it off, get your group together, but also to start scheduling calls with StormGeo. So again, a simple concept, but a very important one. We put a lot of thought and a lot of scientific reasoning into making an area of the country RPA positive when needed. Don, you have some more on this you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, the only thing I really just wanted to chime in on there, Mike, was that we are not bound. You mentioned earlier about the mandate difference between StormGeo and the National Hurricane Center. And I say this all the time, we're blessed here in the United States to have the National Hurricane Center as a resource. We have one of the better public hurricane monitoring and regional meteorological organizations in the world that's responsible for weather, but their mandate is public safety. Their mandate is not corporate needs. And so we also have the benefit of not having to wait until they designate something, either an invest area, which is the terminology that they use, or disturbance. We don't have to wait for that designation before we can actually take something and realize that it poses a threat to our clients and go RPA positive. So as you pointed out here, this is a disturbance in the Eastern Caribbean. If this were on our daily briefing, it would probably just be a numbered disturbance using our numbering system. But if we believe the potential exists for clients to be impacted, we have the flexibility. In fact, I think we have the responsibility to go ahead and bring that designation for the correct locations to a positive. So as you point out, at a minimum for most of our clients, step 1 in their plan is to begin monitoring and assessing where they stand relative to the timeline that's there. And so getting that notification, we often use the term tap on the shoulder to describe what it is. The only other thing I wanted to mention here is that for most commercial enterprises, they do in fact have a written hurricane response plan. It's probably the one area of weather, particularly if you're exposed along the Gulf Coast or the Atlantic coast in the United States, where you actually have a written phased plan. If you don't, we can help with that, or what we can do, we'll talk a little bit about this later, is we can work to make sure our tools best integrate with that plan. So if you have a plan, great, we can work with that. If you don't, we can help you put one together. We've been doing a lot of that this year. Mike, as you well know, you and I have been working with several prospective clients on that, but also the importance of the fact that we can go RPA positive based upon the needs of business and not upon the constraints that the National Hurricane Center is bound by, as an example.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Don. So this is an example of what a notification may look like. It's a sample one, but it's an email notification. It tells you the RPA status, your locations that would be impacted, and whether they're newly upgraded. We also send downgrade messaging. So if your area is moved out of the area that we think is going to see impacts, that can be sent as well. Okay, so moving on the timeline tools, the next timeline tool is called WCS, or worst case scenario. So imagine you have a storm out here just northeast of Cuba, north of the Dominican Republic, and it's expected to follow the path here along the southern central Gulf of Mexico and head really towards the Brownsville, Texas area. But you're in Houston or the Beaumont area. So what you need to know is, in a worst case, so if the storm moves at its maximum projected speed and hits the location at peak intensity and size, when you can start seeing impacts. And so this is important in your planning as well. And we use this in those trigger reports that Don mentioned that we'll go through here in a little bit. This also ties in closely with our next tool called our probability of wind impact, or PWI. And we, instead of focusing on the center of the storm, we do focus on the center of the storm, obviously, because that's how we track where it's moving. We've received a lot of hurricane response plans in the past, and we review these all the time, that say we'll take this action when it's 48 hours from impact, or when we're 72 hours away. And we always say, away from what? Because if you're waiting to do something 48 hours away from the eye of the storm hitting, it's likely already too late. So we focus on the wind fields, and in particular, 39-mile-per-hour wind field, which is the tropical storm strength wind field. We also focus on others, 58 miles per hour, 74, and 100-mile-per-hour wind fields. But 39, that's typically, remember, that's a sustained wind, so you're probably having gusts in the 50s and 60s. And also, that's usually about the time that bridges may start shutting down, emergency services may start pulling back. So that's really when we feel that it's unsafe to be outdoors, and it's a time that you should have most of your actions buttoned up. But we have a percentage that goes with each of these wind fields with each advisory. So you'll actually be able to see over the course of the storm whether the risk for you is increasing or decreasing just by looking at these probabilities. So we use that pretty often as well. Finally, our Hurricane Severity Index is a tool that we use. Now, everyone, I would assume, is very familiar with the Saffir-Simpson scale. That's been around for a very long time. It's a great tool. We include it in most of our forecasts as well. There is some limitations to it, though. So if there was a storm and a hurricane hunter dropped a drop sonde into it and found a maximum sustained wind of 120 miles per hour in the eye wall, it's automatically categorized as a Category 3 storm because it has 120 mile per hour winds. But not all storms are created the same. So what we came up with is a Hurricane Severity Index, or HSI. It's a 50-point scale where we have 25 points for the winds, but also 25 points for the wind field size. And this next graphic really illustrates this in good detail. These are two storms, Ivan and Dennis, that hit 1 year apart from each other in the northern Gulf of Mexico, Mobile, Pensacola. Both had 120 mile per hour sustained winds, making them both a Category 3. But we've highlighted the hurricane force wind field, and you can see for Ivan, it's much larger than it is for Dennis. And so therefore our HSI at landfall for Ivan was a 32 out of 50. Dennis was an 18 out of 50. Even though the intensity points were the same for both, the size points for Ivan were much larger, and you can see the damage was 7 times as high for Ivan as is for Dennis. Pretty obvious reasons why. With a larger wind field, you're often under the strongest winds for a longer period of time. And as you have more rain and the winds are more persistent, more trees can come down, more infrastructure can be impacted. But also a large storm pushes up much more in the way of a storm surge. If people can remember Hurricane Ike, and I know I mentioned that just because it was my first hurricane to go through, but it made landfall in the upper Texas coast back in 2008 as a Category 2. But it caused billions of damage and unfortunately several casualties, especially along the coast, because it was so large they had water overtaking Galveston Island 2 days before the storm made landfall. And that was just sheerly due to the actual size of the storm. People wouldn't evacuate because they heard Category 2. And they're saying, Category 2, I've lived through plenty of Category 2s, I don't need to evacuate. But it's such a large storm, so you need to be cognizant of that. Here's a table of some HSI scales over the past several years. So pick your favorite storm, and you can see on here what our HSI totals were. So you can see Carla, 1961, tops the list we had at 42. We've done some post-analysis on a lot of these storms. I mentioned Katrina was a 36 out of 50. So you can really see with some of these, Ike was a 27. Really, you get above 20 and 25, you're talking about a significant storm, whether it being from the size or the wind impact. The timeline trigger reports, and I do want to be cognizant of time. I want to go into the website here shortly. But the timeline trigger reports, what this does is it takes all of that information and we integrate it with your hurricane response plan. And what this really does is that every time we do an advisory and a site forecast, you would also get a trigger report. And the most important pieces of this trigger report, I'm going to highlight here. Right here, these would be your phases from your plan. These would be the triggers that match up to the phases of your plan that we work with you ahead of time to come up with. And we have a lot of studies and data that we use to come up with these values. Notice we use the worst case scenario, the probability of wind impact. So those tools are definitely included in here. And on the top, what this will do is it'll tell you based on the latest advisory, what phase of your plan you should be in and when we think you should be in your next phase of the plan. So here currently phase 2 based on the latest forecast, but phase 3, 13 hours from now. So, you know, depending on how many hours that is, you may want to be proactive and move ahead in your planning stage, especially if it's like late on a Friday or something along those lines. Don, do you have something brief to add to this with time constraints in mind here?
Yeah, and I will keep it brief because those time constraints and the graphic, I think, speaks for most things here. The most important part you've already hit upon. This is your plan tied to our forecasting, and it's designed to give you something that you can actually make decisions upon. And one of my favorite things that I get to do for StormGeo and working with clients is having us going through evaluations of their plans to look for ways that we can improve their plans, and often bringing them into the tropical timeline trigger report process actually produces improvements, notable improvements, where our clients have said you were able to make our plan better because of going through this process. So if you're a client who hasn't done that, I would encourage it. If you're definitely not a client and you have a plan, this is where we can deliver, I think, the absolute most value with tropical weather and how it plays into your decision making.
Yeah, and we can also use these plans and help you conduct tabletop exercises and drills ahead of the season as well. They're really helpful. So if you're interested in any of that, you can reach out to us as well. All right, finally, kind of to wrap up this PowerPoint portion of the presentation, we do have tropical video updates. So we have video updates every day that correspond to the Atlantic Daily Briefing. These can be found on our website. It can also be found on our mobile app. And with each advisory that we have video updates as well. When we were in the office before this new normal, we have a full studio in our office with the green screen, and there's Chris, you know, doing his thing on the green screen. It's not as easy as you'd think. You got to point to a blank wall and know where you're pointing, so not everyone's as good as it is others. But you know, the way things are today, we're still producing these videos, but they look a little bit different. But they're still going to be recorded at the same time and posted as needed. This is actually a screenshot of our Atlantic Daily Briefing from yesterday morning, and that's Fred Schmoody, who's one of our senior forecasters doing the briefing for yesterday morning. Don, we want to talk a little bit more about the pandemic work?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't want to, we've hit upon this before in previous webinars, so I don't want to necessarily be repetitive of what we've talked about before. But as you mentioned, you know, whether we like the term or not, we are living in a new normal now. And that's changed the way that our clients are even implementing and using those plans. For example, during Cristobal here recently, we saw about a 40% spike in the number of our consultative briefings with clients that were now involving a video sharing element. Why was that? Well, everybody's using Zoom and GoToMeeting and WebEx and Skype to connect to their colleagues who are not in the same office anymore, that are working from home. And so they were naturally using that to communicate with us during the storm. And because suddenly there was the video briefing capability that you could do inside of a Zoom meeting, for example, that you might not do on a phone briefing, we find ourselves doing a lot more of that. So we've already seen one of the impacts here on the first landfalling storm in the Gulf of Mexico this year, just on what the new normal is doing, what the new work paradigm is doing. One of the things I'm just encouraging clients to do is think through what this means. Cristobal was a fairly non-impactful event in terms of how tropical weather goes. We will have more dangerous threats that will come along as the season progresses. So think through how this distributed workforce is going to change how you communicate and how you make decisions. And the time to do that is before you're obviously in the middle of the event. And then also thinking about what new challenges may exist for asset protection and your response activity, either given decreased staffing. Unfortunately, it's the reality of a pandemic world. A lot of companies have had to cut back on staffing or have had to reduce staffing levels, and what the implications of social distancing may be on your impact. So for example, something that used to be a decision point 72 hours out from impact may need to be a decision point now that it's exercised 96 hours out. Why? You just need more time to execute because you're functioning in a new mode of execution. And then of course, the time to do it is now. What can you do now that makes sure you're ready then? The analogy that I always like to use, probably use it too much, is that idea of what sports teams do, particularly football. Hopefully we'll get that in the fall. Sports would be nice to come back, but that idea of practicing like you play. And so what you can do and simulate in practice, Mike mentioned drills and other exercises, what you can do there to be ready for the event just makes you more confident that you're ready for the event and better ready to execute when the event comes.
All right, thanks, Don. And on to my final slide, and I've referenced this a few times, the ability to consult a meteorologist. As a Storm Geo customer, you have the ability to do everything from calling in and talking directly to a meteorologist 24/7, 365, to emailing our meteorologist, our client services team, or requesting conference call support. This is something we do quite often. Like Don mentioned, even that number's been spiking this year. But we oftentimes will get on a conference call with one of our customers. We'll give them our update on the forecast, answer some questions, and then get off the call, or stay on if you want us to. So we do that very often, and it's provided a lot of additional information, and it helps to gauge the confidence level a little bit more when you're talking directly with the meteorologist. So with that being said, I am going to now move into the web portal a little bit. And right here, I'm looking, I'm showing a test storm because as luck would have it, the day of the webinar, isn't really a good storm to do a demo on, which most people would be like, that's fine, let's just keep the storms away. But to show things here, I have to have a test storm. So for that, I'm going to a separate test website that we have that looks a little bit different than what our newest web portal looks like. But let me just kind of poke through here at a few things. First of all, we have links to the daily briefing for every basin. We have links to active systems. We have links to past systems. And again, I'll show you on the new portal what this looks like. It's very similar. But what I'm on here is I'm on this Hurricane Carl. It is a test storm, and it is a storm that's in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico, expected to impact the Houston area. This is advisory number 16. So this shows you what an advisory on the web portal would look like should there be an active storm. So you get all the information up here at the top. You get the key points, like I mentioned earlier, the forecast, the map, and even below you get the categories in the forecast down here as well. Now, if the storm is close to making landfall, right here to the right, you would see some additional tabs that would have rainfall information and storm surge information. So that would be on there as well. But you'll also notice on the map above it, we have several other different options. So our track map can be offshore or onshore. Really, the only difference is it takes the least blocks off the Gulf of Mexico. Our hurricane severity index, which I talked about earlier, there's a couple different presentations of that. It'll show the past size and intensity points to the left of the line, and our forecasted size and intensity points to the right of the line. So we have that both as a bar chart and as a line graph. So you can kind of see when the peak intensity of the storm based on our hurricane severity index is going to be. Scope of winds. This is through the life cycle of the storm where you can expect the highest winds to be. So these are sustained winds. So here you can see the scope of winds for the storm have the 100-mile-per-hour winds. You can see the scale at the bottom impacting the Houston and the Galveston Bay area. But even still, you have squalls that could reach all the way up to Oklahoma City. And you could have 25-mile-per-hour winds, almost tropical storm force winds, reach up to Dallas. So keep that in mind. Even if you're not along the immediate coast, there's still plenty of impacts that can occur inland with one of these storms. And with our teams broken up into a TropicsWatch team and a StormWatch team, where TropicsWatch focuses on everything tropical. Our StormWatch team can also help pick up on a lot of the flooding and some of the other severe aspects of these storms once it moves well inland. So we're always going to be tracking this storm even after it becomes non-tropical in nature. Our probability of wind impact, the PWI. So maybe you want to see on this advisory what the probabilities are for a specific wind field. So let's look at 100-mile-per-hour winds. You can see there's a 30% probability of 100-mile-per-hour winds here along the immediate coast to the southeast of Houston. So that's an important key to have on there as well. And another thing I like to point out is this storm Saturn winds, just because I think it looks cool, but it'll show the actual progression of the storm, and you can hit the play button here and it'll actually animate it. And I'm going to slow it down a little bit because you can actually step through and see when the actual winds are going to impact each area. You can see here it starts decreasing with the friction over land, and then it dissipates. So that's actually a pretty neat tool to have as well. And another way to look at that, I don't think it's quite as neat, but it works kind of the same way, is you can see the animation for the wind radii that way. Now, the other thing to point out here on the page, which is very important, is if you have sites that we're monitoring. So after the discussion, you'll have a tab called Site Forecasts. So keep in mind, this is a demo site, so we have lots of locations on here. If you might only have 5 or 10 locations that are in the path of a storm, but these will be listed on here. And just from this chart alone, you can get a lot of information. As a location, let's look at Galveston here. You have the location, latitude, longitude, the max wind we expect, the max gust we expect, the estimated time of arrival, in this case, the 39-mile-per-hour winds, estimated time of departure, and whether you're RPA positive or negative. Now, in a real-world situation, this would be RPA positive. It's red, it flashes. It's very obvious that you're RPA positive, but since this is a demo, it's not showing up on here. Also, if you do have trigger reports for one of these locations, it would show up here as a logo for a PDF that you can open up and see your trigger reports. Say you wanted to see a 100-mile-per-hour wind field, you could go to this ETD of winds, go to 100 miles per hour, and let's sort it. And so you can see even the earliest arrival of the 100-mile-per-hour winds is going to be this rollover pass locations. But the max winds, the max gusts are going to be the same area. So you can actually sort through a lot of this as well. So the site forecasts alone have a lot of information. But now let's dive into one of the locations. Let's go to that rollover pass. And when you click on an actual location, this is where you get that wind graphic. So you can see here, this is the wind speed over time, and you can mouse over it and it has all the wind information. Below it's the table that's driving that graph, the wind direction, forecast sustained wind, max gusts, that's all there as well. And so that's real easy to see the time periods where you're going to have to focus on the higher winds. But in addition, we have that, again, that PWI, probability of wind impact. This is a graphic where each of these colored lines represents one of the wind fields. So you can just, by looking at this line graph, you can see that the threat is increasing. But even below that, you can see each advisory, starting with the oldest, moving up to the newest advisory. You can see each percentage. So if we look at the hurricane force wind, 74-mile-per-hour wind field. So advisory 15 for this location, there was only a 39% chance. Well, I say only, but that's a pretty high percentage chance this far out. But you can see the latest advisory, that's up to 42%. So you can definitely see that the risk for your location for these winds is increasing if this is your location. Site summary. This page really just has a lot of information in one site. We have everything from the current and forecast winds to the timeline tools, the probability of wind impact, the worst case scenario. We have the estimated time of arrival for each wind field. And not only do we have the hours until it happens, but also the exact time based on the advisory. So for this, the tropical storm force strength winds expected to arrive 35 hours from now or on the 24th at 2:22 p.m. Central Time. And a worst case, 2 hours earlier than that, 33 hours at 12:53 p.m. And then that probability of wind impact, 89%, that's up 4% from the previous advisory. And we have graphics. Now, a lot of this information that you see on here is exactly the information that we use to use your trigger reports. So that's where we tie this information into your plan and derive your trigger reports from that. And then we have another tab on the worst case scenario showing each field and when the earliest arrival time is possible, along with the max winds when you could expect to see those. So 145 mile per hour max possible winds. And then one more thing, I mentioned the wind profile generator. That is a really neat tool that a lot of people like. So if we're going to pick a location, we can do, let's do Lake Charles, Louisiana. I can go in here and find Louisiana. You can pick a time zone, a unit, and hit submit. And what it'll do is it'll create a wind profile for any location that you put in there. Now, it doesn't have all the other tools, worst case scenario and things like that. Those are reserved for the sites that we're actually monitoring for you, but it has that wind speed information. Like I said, this is very useful if you're going somewhere or have folks traveling somewhere. So that's pretty much in general how the TropicsWatch page looks when there's an active storm. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is also show you on our Vortex portal. Now, keep in mind, this is a demo portal that I'm going into, how the TropicsWatch displays on here. Remember, I used the other portal because we're using a test storm. But with our new Vortex portal that we're currently rolling out, if you haven't received it yet, we'll be working on it. You'll receive a lot of information from us when we get to that point. Some of you may already be on it, but it is really map-based. And so not only on the map do we have locations and all the radar and information, all of these layers that we do and that I talked about, we have as layers on here as well. So I can put up active tropical cyclones and it would pull up any active storms right now, and it would have the uncertainty cones. You can pull a lot of that information up on here as well. But the bulk of the tropical information is going to be under this TropicsWatch tab. And so here you can see we have the overview, which I mentioned earlier, the daily briefing. If there's an active system impacting land, you would see that on there. But I think Dolly has since dissipated because I'm not seeing it on here anymore. Your locations that are monitored and past systems. And then one more thing I wanted to show on here, another layer that we have that is pretty neat, and we talk about storm surge being of a great importance as well. So we have some storm surge layers on here under US storm surge, and we have different kinds of storm surge layers. We have planning layers, and then we have active system layers. A planning layer is taking a worst case scenario, what the storm surge would be, for example, for a Category 3 storm. So you could put this up against your locations, and we have a legend showing what the numbers mean. So that red is a 9-foot possible inundation. And so you can zoom in and get some really good detail on what you expect from a Category 3, Category 4, Category 5. Now, the storm surge from active systems would be the expected storm surge from any current storms that are out there. Don, is there anything else you'd like to point out on here? If not, that really concludes my portion and we can open up to some questions. So Don, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is obviously for the convenience, many of our clients prefer to use our mapping layers here that are already on their portal, be it the demo portal or what we sometimes refer to as the Vortex portal, or what we refer to as our classic portal that you were using earlier. But many of these layers are also available, and we can discuss how they can be made available to clients who are utilizing GIS technology. So what they would like to do is bring this type of information into their common operating pictures or into their way of visualizing and displaying other location information in a geospatial format on a map. We can work with our clients to make this type of information, including many of our proprietary layers like the track we were talking about earlier, the threatened regions from active cyclones, where that can be incorporated by our clients directly into their internal mapping interfaces. The way that works and how that works is different client to client, but if that's something you're interested in and want to have a conversation with us about, there's ways that we can do that to make our integration between your decision making and your visualizing your geographic information and the weather information that we're providing that's helping to drive those decisions work even better together.
Okay, thanks, Don. With that, Lindsay, we have about 10 minutes left if we want to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Don, for the presentation. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. And just, as a reminder, we did record the webinar and we will be emailing that out today or the next day. And feel free to share that with any of your colleagues who may not have been able to join us live. We definitely want you to feel that all the members of your team are prepared for this hurricane season. Now, we do have one question so far, and it's about the Saharan dust that we've been seeing on the news. Can you, one of you, maybe Mike, tell me a little bit about what this means for hurricanes this year?
Yeah, absolutely. We've heard a lot about the Saharan air layer. It's called the SAL, S-A-L. It's actually a common feature across the tropics between about April and late July. So it causes some stronger northeasterly winds to blow off the coast of Africa, which drives some clouds and dust across the tropics. And so it sometimes can extend closer to the ground. And so typically when this happens, the deep tropics are typically hurricane free because you get a lot of that dry, dusty air that infiltrates into these systems, so they can't develop all that much. However, sometimes you can get a storm forming just ahead or along the southern border of it. But once the dust cloud subsides, tropics really return to normal. Typically, these outbreaks end in July, but like we said, they're really pretty normal April through July, which is with the end in July. That's one reason why the hurricane activity tends to ramp up, especially in August into September. Now for the current outbreak, it looks like this will be affecting the tropics for about another week. But then after that time, the Atlantic will be back open for business as far as hurricane potential. And you may have heard on the news some that, this is a bit stronger than normal SAL or Saharan air layer outbreak, and that's true. But its effects are only temporary. And we think that the impact on the seasonal activity will be fairly insignificant, especially with the fact that we're already through the D storm and through mid-June. So we may have a lull for a little while, for a few weeks, but it'll pick back up in earnest after this dissipates.
Thanks, Mike. And then I do have another question about the rivers overlay that was, in the portal view. Can you review what that rivers overlay is for? This person says, in addition to surge, they also monitor local rivers near their facilities for potential flooding due to rainfall.
I can handle that question to some degree while Mike pulls it up there, Lindsay. We have a suite, again, not just, this has been focused on tropical weather, but we cover all types of weather risks, and that includes the types of things that can happen along the North American river system. And so the rivers layer will actually bring in information from river gauges and other river flood threats that exist. It's among a whole series of tools that we actually have that enable our clients to keep track of what's going on, either because they have facilities that are directly adjacent to these structures, or it might be because they have barge traffic where they actually are using the rivers themselves. And so, for example, river heights and river flooding may make passage under bridges or other areas possible or not possible for their barge traffic. So we can look at it both graphically in terms of demonstrating here on the map what's going on there. We have some other tools which are not probably on this demo portal here that Mike can easily access, that much like the trigger reports are directly tied to a client's particular asset location and their needs. We can do the same type of thing with river flooding, river gauge, rainfall activity, those types of things to help guard against that risk, regardless of whether it's tropical or not.
Thanks, Mike. Don, sorry. And then let's see, we have another question, seems to be about hurricane action plans. Do you have any advice for what we should do at this point in the season if we either have a plan that hasn't been updated, or I guess for some people who might not have a plan at all?
Yeah, Don, do you want me to take this?
Please, you lead the effort with our business continuity, both internally and externally. You're perfectly suited to do it.
Okay, yeah, of course. And with our team here, we've read through a lot of hurricane response plans, so we're very well versed in reading through these and making recommendations on them. So for our current customers, our current clients, we're always more than happy to review your hurricane response plan as is, just to get a second set of eyes on it and to make some recommendations. So that's definitely something we can do. We also, if you don't have a hurricane response plan, we do have some templates available that we can send out. I think it's like a 23-page or 27-page template, which is a good place to start. And I know I recently helped one large company develop their hurricane response plan using these templates as well. So yeah, you can definitely reach out to us if you have any questions about any hurricane response plans.
Thanks, Mike.
Mhm.
I don't see any other questions coming in, so I guess we can go ahead and conclude our webinar today. If you have any questions later, or you didn't want to type something in, then we will respond. You can send us an email, and we'll follow up with you outside of the webinar here today. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you in a future webinar.